Lindsey, tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, so today we mark Martin Luther King Jr. Day, observed near his actual birthday on the 15th of January, a moment meant not just for remembrance, but for reflection and for recommitment. Dr. King dared this country to imagine something better, a society rooted in love, unity, and nonviolence, where dignity isn't selective and opportunity isn't conditional. That dream wasn't abstract, it was forged in conflict, pressure tested by reality, and aimed directly at America's unfinished business. If Dr. King's life taught us anything, it's that hope matters most when evidence points toward despair. His ministry unfolded in a nation defined by segregation, an unpopular war abroad, and the systemic exclusion of Black Americans from economic and political power. And no, 2026 is not 1963 at all, but the unease that so many people feel right now makes his message feel urgently correct. Too often, the March on Washington is remembered only for one speech, but more than 250,000 people gathered for the March on Washington, the full name for Jobs and Freedom, demanding racial justice and economic inclusion. The dream wasn't just moral, it was material. More than 6 decades later, we've made progress, but America still has a long way to go to deliver the equity and economic justice that should come with citizenship. That's why today's debates matter. President Trump said in an interview last week with the New York Times that he believed civil rights era protections resulted in white people being, quote, very badly treated. Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP, responded to that, saying there was, quote, no evidence that white men were discriminated against as a result of the civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Act and efforts to rectify the long history of this country denying access to people based on race in every measurable category. Dr. King believed deeply in the promise of America, even as he relentlessly challenged its failures. That tension feels familiar to me. I grew up with a father who taught me to be proud to be American. We had an American flag hanging outside of the front of our home. And that pride still coexisted with the truth that Black Americans built this country, acknowledged by historians and institutions through centuries of enslaved labor that fueled its physical and economic foundation without ever receiving equal share of what they helped create. Remember that I Have a Dream speech came amid a long season of anti-Black violence. In Birmingham, children were met with fire hoses and police dogs. In Jackson, sit-ins were attacked. Medgar Evers was murdered outside of his home. Against that reality, Dr. King imagined still a future where, quote, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down together at the table of brotherhood. That vision wasn't naive, it was defiant. Dr. King didn't deny despair, but he refused to surrender to it. During his 1964 Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he said, quote, I refuse to accept despair as the final response to ambiguities of history. He chose hope as an act of resistance. Today, we still face persistent wealth gaps, housing and education disparities, mass incarceration, and global violence. These troubles weren't created by one election or one moment. Despair, though, has never liberated anyone. What we need now is courage, the courage to see immigrants as human beings, to recognize rural America as a place worthy of investment, and to accept that our world is deeply interconnected. We can't wall ourselves off from global pain, but we can reach far enough to make a difference. Dr. King's greatest gift wasn't just the dream, it was the discipline of pushing toward a better tomorrow. And we honor him best when we remember that the third Monday in January isn't just a day off for some, but a call to live in his reflection, to choose courage over comfort, justice over silence, and hope, even when it's hard.
Well, I find a lot to admire about Martin Luther King, and I think that we have, I think his message has actually fallen out of fashion with both many on the left and the right, and it's had negative consequences. Colorblindness needs to be brought back, in my view, as a concept. And I really do blame, you might roll your eyes at this, but I'm going to do it anyway, wokeness for attacking the concept of colorblindness. Through the 2010s, progressives wanted us to pay so much attention to issues of race and identity. And the impact of that was that people on the right also started thinking about whiteness as an identity in reaction. And now there's just too much discussion of race overall. We should go back to the normie liberal version that Martin Luther King outlined, that you do not judge a man by the color of his skin. We shouldn't even see it. We should train ourselves not to see it. But instead, we were trained by Robin DiAngelo type people in the 2010s to see it everywhere. They said that being colorblind was a form of racism itself, because race so affects us that we need to be paying attention to all that all the time. Well, that has created this moment where racism is increasing. It is increasing. There's no argument against it at this point. I encounter more racist sentiment today than I did growing up. And that's a really damning indictment of what has brought us to this moment. But the answer to it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s message. I fully believe that. I don't think that civil rights, that ending discrimination is an attack on white people. I would argue that racial preferencing is an attack on not just white people, but whoever is underfavored by the admissions or the hiring, if they are done in accordance with preferences. So we should not have racial preferencing, any of that kind of thing. But colorblindness, which was his fundamental message, is a wonderful concept and is worth bringing back in full force. And those who disdained it, again, on the left, I think have been proven to be very short-sighted in their thinking, because now it's out of fashion, and that's been bad.
Yeah, I think, you know how like they say things like a good old boys club. Sometimes that's not intentional. So when we look at historically why a lot of the programs that the president decided to peel back that aimed and highlighted and encouraged diversity of experience, of color, everything, is because, you know, you just tend to hang out with people who remind you of yourself. And so that might not always be a slight on a person that doesn't look or
Not
feel
me.
like somebody.
There's no one like me.
Well, I'm just saying, Robbie, you know what I mean? Like some people live in communities. You can even look at where I grew up in Long Island. Like, oh, there's an Italian community. Like people just, right now, my friend lives in Silver Spring. She's Ethiopian, and they have a big Ethiopian population. Like people just go where they're comfortable. And so a lot of the hiring practices have mirrored over, like, historically have mirrored that a lot of, if white men were in positions of power, understanding the history of this country, then more often than not, white men will be in these positions, not only in government that Dr. King was saying, open the doors to not see color and let everyone in, but across all leadership roles. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that somehow some people may have their own biases that are not even trying to be detrimental to others, but should clear their mind up and just go based on what you're able to perform. So when we talk about college admissions, some people wouldn't even be looked at as a candidate from, let's say, a deep part of Detroit, but you know, had straight A's because they can't afford a lot of the things that it requires to even get the application done, or the training that maybe their counterpart maybe have had to get a perfect SAT score, if that's even what it's called anymore, whatever the test is.
Well, I mean, if they get a perfect SAT score, they're in.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, but sometimes the advantages or the disadvantages is that the economic reality is that some parents of disadvantaged communities can't afford the same training that their counterparts maybe could afford to get them that perfect score.
Well, but again, let's be colorblind. The economic disadvantage is an economic disadvantage regardless of whether you're black, white, brown, or anything.
And civil rights,
I don't even see it. I'm not going to see it. You're just economically disadvantaged.
Civil rights policy is across the board. It protects people, no matter what race, color. So white people are included in that. Civil rights law protects everyone. That's the law of the land.
They haven't been, because Harvard for years was able to say, if you're white or if you're Asian, we are punishing you in consideration of when you apply here. And that was ruled unconstitutional or illegal by the Supreme Court, which I agree with.
I think if people are accustomed to privilege and not even aware of it, and know that word really irritates people, then just leveling the playing field for some people feels like oppression when it's truly not. So like if you think about more people, if our company right now is expanding and they hire a variety of different people from a variety of different backgrounds, and you're looking like, did all these people get in because of diversity or whatever? It's like, why does that bother you that there's a variety of different people here that have obviously met the criteria to be hired? That's the first and foremost thing. You have to meet the criteria. And then we have to be acknowledging that historically for the past few years, we've hired this percentage of people that look more like us in the communities that we're used to, as opposed to looking at all these different places.
No, we're doing colorblindness. We don't care what the skin color of the people we're hiring or admitting is. We're doing colorblindness. We're bringing back colorblindness. We're not even seeing it. You shouldn't even be able to check a box where you say what it is. We don't know. We don't care. We're not asking that question. We're doing colorblindness. We're treating all people absolutely equal with respect to the law, hiring, admissions, treatment, everything. We don't see it. We don't know. It's all the same. We're the same.
I know. That's when you hop on a Zoom call, right, Robbie, you see that I'm a black woman. So even if
I'm not going to see it.
You will. That's just actual. I can't pretend. It's not a religion. I literally am who I am.
Had this right, and we're going back to that. We don't see it. They don't see it.
Well, if only that were the perfect world and people really didn't see it and then move forward like that. But a lot of people just go with their implicit biases and move forward.
Well, I'm going to manifest the world I want to live into.
Me too.
Lindsay, what's in your lens today?
Well, your favorite topic, Epstein. So at this point, the Jeffrey Epstein story isn't just about a disgraced financier or a sealed set of files. It's about trust. And right now, most Americans do not have it. A new CNN poll makes that painfully clear. Only 6% of Americans say they're satisfied with how the Trump administration has handled the release of Epstein-related documents. 6. And nearly half of Americans, 49% to be exact, say they're dissatisfied with how the Trump administration has handled the release of the documents as well. And perhaps the most telling part is this. 67% of Americans believe the government is intentionally holding back information that should be public. That's not partisan noise. That's a credibility problem. Because despite the Justice Department releasing thousands of documents under pressure from Congress, officials admit those represent less than 1% of what they actually have. Less than 1%. Meanwhile, the DOJ has acknowledged potentially more than 1 million additional Epstein-related documents are still under review with no clear timeline for when or even if the public will see them at all. This matters because Congress didn't politely request transparency, it mandated it. A bill passed overwhelmingly in the House and unanimously in the Senate required the full release of Epstein documents by mid-December. Not only has that deadline come and gone, but the administration has also failed to explain why so many files remain redacted, another requirement written directly into the law. And that's where the frustration turns into suspicion. President Trump has grown increasingly irritated by the focus on Epstein, particularly as the midterm elections loom. But political annoyance doesn't override public accountability, especially when the documents that have been released include photos of Trump alongside Epstein, images the president says reflect a social relationship he ended years ago, which he maintains involved no wrongdoing. Former President Bill Clinton, we have to mention that, also appears in multiple photos, and his team has accused the administration of selectively highlighting those images. Again, no allegations of wrongdoing, but the selective transparency only fuels the perception that this process is not neutral. And perception matters because while the administration insists more attorneys are reviewing files, FYI, there are roughly 500 people involved in reviewing these files now, Americans are still being asked to wait. Meanwhile, outside Washington's marble halls, the public conversation is not slowing down. A group calling itself the Secret Handshake put up a massive installation on the National Mall, a 10-foot replica of that birthday card allegedly sent to Epstein bearing Trump's name, featuring a crude sketch and the line, "Happy Birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Trump denies writing it and even sued the Wall Street Journal over the report, but the symbolism is hard to miss. Now, this is not about art or spectacle. It's about a government that promised transparency and delivered delays. When Americans across party lines believe information is being withheld, not protected, not responsibly reviewed, but intentionally held back, that erodes confidence in institutions already hanging on by a thread. So at the very least, Robbie, if you can't agree that Epstein, since you got me brought into this Epstein mess in the first place,
this is my fault.
Now you're backing away from it, saying it doesn't matter, because that poll also showed that a lot of Republicans are like, even people who spoke out, Lauren Boebert, I believe, kind of like, it's nothing I can do right now. I want to see it through. It'll happen when it happens. I have to worry about the economy. Like, this is her response to people. It's like people don't believe the government. And since we already both agree that...
Not believing the government is...
Yeah, we agree that people in the government are not doing enough. Effectiveness is at an all-time low. We agree on a lot of those things. So when they can't do something as simple as releasing documents to allow transparency for Americans, I mean, what is the holdup? even though the pictures came out, I said Bill Clinton should testify. He should get up there. So, and President Trump should release or provide a deposition. Like, yes, these all should happen. I don't have a problem with this. I'm not defending Bill Clinton. I think people want to understand how somebody who is this gross of a person that has been convicted was allowed to get away with this for so long. It's not about the victims. It's not about the people that you think may be performative and that we don't have information on that have gotten millions of dollars. For me, it's about the fact of who allowed this to happen, what money was being spent.
Who allowed what to happen?
Who allowed Epstein to run amok for all these years without him? You know, it was.
I mean, he was
it was a blind.
prosecuted.
I know, but a blind eye was turned for years, and there was indications that many people might have seen or known this when he had famous friends and when he had rich friends and government friends. And so we need to
It's
understand
not as
the
mysterious as
process.
people think. He was prosecuted, and the evidence was not as compelling as people might think it seems to us now, because of the testimony from the victims not being reliable enough in many cases. So he got what seems like a lighter kind of prison deal, but now that it's been explained to me, is very characteristic of the situation where the evidence is weak.
Oh, this is just so normal to you. Everything, you went from riled up about it to just like, oh yeah, just this is par for the course. I just can't accept
Well,
that.
I
can't
accepted new
accept that.
information when it was given to me. I was like, this seems weird. And then my friend Michael Tracy, who I've interviewed on Rising many times, walked me through, who is not like a, he's not looking to cover for Trump. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He's just someone who believes in due process, and which is something I believe in too. And so I looked at it more closely and was like, oh, all right.
So what about the rest of the people that would like to see this information released?
Well, we can release-
I mean, it was a law
We
that
should
says
release,
they should release
all the
So
information
now,
because people are not satisfied with the information they have, and he agrees with that too. We need to release the information. We need to know more about who was involved, to set people at ease about the potential. I think foreign connections is the main thing. The idea that he was an intelligence asset for a foreign government is disturbing, and it is true that Ghislaine Maxwell, through her father was connected to a foreign intelligence agency. So there's a lot that looks odd at a glance, but close up starts to already become clearer. And I'm also convinced that people are never going to accept any amount of new information because people have been tricked into thinking or been hyped up into thinking by podcasters into thinking that, into some of the administration people,
Okay.
Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. Dan Bongino could not satisfy the hype that he created when he got into government and is now leaving government. So he continues saying things that he knows on the other side that his claims didn't hold up, and he could not manufacture evidence for the claims he was making before he was in government, and now he's going back, so he doesn't have to. He's fixed that by like he had his eyes closed, and then he opened his eyes and could see, and was like, oh, it doesn't look anything like what I thought. Okay, I'm going to go back to closing my eyes. That's basically what he did.
Pam Bondi, don't forget.
Yeah,
about
all
her.
those people. Well, she doesn't know anything, but they tricked themselves into thinking they were going to find evidence that enemies of President Trump, the Democrats, Bill Clinton and others, were themselves complicit in gross underage sexual violations. In the same way the Democrats are now convinced they will find evidence of that with Trump. And guess what? Neither side is going to find evidence that their political enemies were involved in a pedophile ring, because they weren't. They just weren't. Sorry. Sorry you convinced yourself that.
I hope that's the case. But that's why if you release 1% of the documents and everyone is looking for all the information that you said would be released and now is mandated by law, people want answers as to why so much is heavily redacted of that 1%. And then furthermore, why it's not being released. Like there's 500 people. I looked into this yesterday. There's 500 different lawyers and people working on combing through these documents. Like, what's the timeline? If there's not a realistic timeline to happen in mid-December, then what is that new timeline? You should still tell people. You can't just sweep this under the rug. I know it's not going to be the number one issue for the midterms, but there's still plenty of people that were riled up about this that you said are never going to be satisfied. Well, they're certainly not going to be satisfied with 1% of the documents.
I think there's more to learn about from a financial standpoint. Okay, the intelligence angle, which I said, his tenure in the Virgin Islands and his relationships to powerful people in charge there, his relationships with banking associations, and sure, his ongoing conversations with people, Bill Gates, Steve Bannon, Stacey Plaskett, there's Larry Summers, there's 4 of them that span the political spectrum. So this is not trying to get Democrats or trying to get Republicans. There's 4, and there are a couple others that are still communicating with him after his release, Stacey Plaskett, Steve Bannon communicated with him within, the final years of his life. They were texting with him. So that, yes, we can learn more information about that, but you're going to find embarrassing things for those people that should be publicized. You're not going to find that they're trafficking in pedophilia, those people. That's too sensational a claim. Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Let's talk about it. So when President Donald Trump returned to office last January, he declared the start of a golden age of America. 1 year into his second term, what we've actually experienced feels less like a golden age and more like a political stress test, full of speed, spectacle, and sharp division. Now, to be fair, Trump has delivered on several core campaign promises. He ran on peace through strength, and his administration helped broker a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. That fragile deal has held and since now moved into its second phase. On immigration, Trump followed through on his pledge to aggressively crack down. According to the Brookings Institution, the U.S. experienced negative net migration in 2025 for the first time in at least 50 years, largely due to fewer people entering the country. Gas prices are actually lower than last year. He passed his long-promised bill extending Trump-era tax cuts. Now, these are tangible wins for supporters who actually wanted this action. But accomplishment does not equal approval, and that's where the disconnect starts to begin. A Quinnipiac poll found 57% of voters disapprove of how ICE is enforcing immigration laws, a discontent that spilled into protests following the death of Renee Good in Minnesota. A CNN SSRS poll released Friday found that 58% of Americans say Trump's first year of his second term has been a, quote, failure. Part of that distraction stems from promises that collapsed under scrutiny. DOGE, for example, the administration's high-profile government-slashing initiative, promised $2 trillion in savings. After shuttering USAID and laying off thousands of federal workers, Elon Musk acknowledged the effort saved about $160 billion, a fraction of the $2 trillion cut that was sold to voters on the campaign trail. Then there's the whole tariff chaos. Trump rolled out sweeping tariffs on nearly all U.S. trading partners on what he dubbed, quote, Liberation Day. Markets recoiled, stocks lost nearly $3.1 trillion in value in a single day, despite promises of a manufacturing boom. The final jobs report of 2025 showed hiring cooling across the entire economy. And while politicians argue over optics, Americans are still paying more. Inflation is up 2.7% year over year. The typical household is spending $184 more per month than last year and $590 more than 3 years ago, according to Moody's Analytics. Grocery prices are not down in any meaningful way. Energy, medical care, coffee, and ground beef all cost more. Healthcare, after a government shutdown on President Trump's watch last year, Trump finally unveiled his great healthcare plan, a framework so vague that top officials admitted the details were sparse. But perhaps the most consistent success story of Trump's second term belongs to himself. According to an analysis by the New York Times editorial board, President Trump has used the office of his presidency to make at least $1.4 billion, a figure they stress is a minimum. This comes from overseas licensing deals to cryptocurrency sales. The line between public service and private gain has never looked thinner. A hotel in Oman, an office tower in Western India, a golf course on the outskirts of Saudi Arabia. These are just a few of the more than 20 overseas projects that the Trump organization is pursuing, often requiring cooperation with foreign governments. 1 year in, Trump has acted aggressively on his agenda, but polling and economic data suggest many Americans are unconvinced those actions have improved their daily lives. So Trump's pretty wealthy. He has all these connections that we can see direct lines of how cooperation of foreign governments leads to agreements on his end that benefit other countries. And so that can be frowned upon. But the same guy who was America First gets a low rating on the economy, the thing that he most campaigned on, and also tons of criticism about some of the policies that he did implement that people may have supported on the campaign trail, like immigration. He does have immigration down, but 57% of people in this Quinnipiac poll disagree with the way he's going about it. So I think there's a lot of issues in year one that make overall look like this wasn't a success. And the biggest one is the fact that the economy is not better. You can't do the same thing Biden did. And you talked a little bit about that in the last segment, is say, oh, it might feel bad, but it really is good. Look at these poll numbers. Like, that's not real. People are either paying more or less. People are either more comfortable or not. They're looking at your first term and you're referring to making America great again and reminding people of how he felt that he revived the economy in 2017. And then people are like, well, can you do it again? And the answer seems like no.
Yeah, it has been a challenging year. The administration came in, new administration, with all this power, with a mandate, with winning the popular vote too. This was Trump's greatest success. He has legislative majorities, and I think it's disappointing that they have not tried to achieve more or to make more permanent. Trump has, issued executive order after executive order to bring about his vision of the economy, of immigration, of so many other issues. But there's a sense in which it's very impermanent because they have not put it into law with the force of legislation. And the courts, despite being very, conservative leaning, don't have an indication that they're just going to rubber stamp everything that he does. The Supreme Court might undo his tariffs in a very dramatic way any day now, any hour, which would be an incredible blow. He tried to fire lots of government employees, brought Elon Musk in to reshape the federal bureaucracy, which I thought was one of the best ideas he'd had. And that fizzled out. It didn't stick. So much of this won't stick. And I think that's what's bad. So he is acting most boldly in the domain of foreign policy because that is where the president is most unconstrained and where there's a long history of not having to go to Congress, of Congress being the junior partner. Again, that's not the way the founders intended it to be, but it has been already established by previous presidents that the presidency can just act and do what they want in terms of foreign policy. So that's where he's focused so much of his attention. But as much as I think there has been definitely a mixed bag, some good, some ill on foreign policy, the American people, I won't say that it's not that they don't care about foreign policy, but it's that their wallets, their pocketbooks, the prices they pay for things, the availability of houses, of child care support, their immediate economic reality is their top concern. Foreign policy, doesn't pierce the bubble of the average American person to the degree that the media thinks it does. The media is obsessed with foreign policy. Reporters always like talking about, everybody's a poli-sci major in journalism. Everybody's obsessed with global affairs and moving pieces on a chessboard and the great risk map of our planet. And Americans, when they go to the ballot box, are usually thinking about the price of eggs, whether housing prices have gone up, what the healthcare policy is going to be, those sorts of things, and what the immigration policy is going to be, very much, which is an issue where Donald Trump still enjoys a lot of support compared to Democrats, even though you're right that some of the people who came into his coalition are not happy about the excesses of the enforcement. It's very showy, very tough guy. I'm uncomfortable with it too. But there's no trust. The American people have so little trust in the Democratic Party on this issue because of how badly Joe Biden bungled it. And that is a reputational harm the party has suffered that will take a generation to undo, I think.
I think people are also just wondering, what he didn't campaign on putting Maduro in jail. He didn't campaign on
just a nice little bonus.
I know, but this is like
no, not that. I don't think anyone's voting against him.
I know, but these are the flagship staples when you define a presidency and look back at it. Let's say a couple years after they leave office, like what defines Trump presidency? So
Greenland.
One thing that I mentioned, it'll be Petty talks about Greenland.
I mean, if he grew the size of the United States by a third, that would be
against all of our allies' wishes. The way that he has berated Ukraine's president. And kind of almost felt like he's taking the side of Russia. Also, Russia's included in this peace plan with Gaza that we talked about. He welcomed Vladimir Putin into that conversation. So a lot of interesting things going on that define him that are out of this country. And so for the person that ran on America First, you could see why people who don't feel any better than they did before he was president are a little bit irritated. Not to say that the problems around the world are not ours to consider, but people are frustrated.
Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Let's get to it. So Theo Von isn't your typical political gatekeeper. He's a comedian, a podcaster, And whether he's out to be or not one of the most influential conversationalists in today's MAGA-friendly media ecosystem, that's still up for debate. But what's making him interesting isn't that he leans right or left. It's that he doesn't fully belong to either side. He said it plainly on a recent episode of This Past Weekend, his podcast.
It doesn't even feel like either one of these parties works for anybody anymore. Like, if anything, in the past few years, it's really started to feel like, oh, all these guys are working for somebody else, and we're just this other group of people down here.
That line really reflects how a lot of Americans feel right now, politically homeless, and the numbers back up that statement. A Gallup poll shows a record high 45% of U.S. adults identified as political independents in 2025. That's nearly half the country. That's not apathy, that's disillusionment. Theo's guest this week was Senator Bernie Sanders, someone who knows what it means to operate outside traditional party lines. Bernie made it clear that starting a new party isn't realistic right now, which is why he caucuses with Democrats, even as he argues the party itself is split.
We are trying to move the Democratic Party to be a party that stands with working class Americans and has the courage to take on powerful special interests. Now, there's another faction of the Democratic Party that, doesn't like Trump for, I think, a lot of right reasons. I agree with him. But basically cuddles up to the moneyed interests. And that's the vision that we have.
That divide matters because it helps explain why so many voters don't feel represented by either side. The conversation turned into immigration and ICE, another issue where public opinion is shifting. A CBS YouGov poll found that 61% of Americans now describe ICE as being, quote, too tough. More Americans believe enforcement efforts are sweeping up people beyond dangerous criminals, including those who've lived here for years, worked, and have raised families. Now, Bernie laid out what he believes most Americans actually do agree on.
When I think what most Americans agree with, if you have lived in this, even if you came across the border illegally, but if you have obeyed the rules of America, you haven't committed crimes, you're working hard, you're raising your family, you need a path towards citizenship as part of comprehensive immigration reform. And by the way, given the fact that we have worker shortages all over this country, we need those workers, okay?
Then he went further, criticizing how President Trump is using ICE now.
And I think it's Trump saying, I have the power, and we got domestic army, it's called ICE, and we're going to go out there, and we're going to arrest, and we're going to intimidate. And part of that, this is what Trumpism is about. It's intimidation. All right, you're in the media, you're CBS, you say something, I'm going to sue you, Theo, you say something I don't like, I may sue you. I don't like Venezuela, I'm going to, send in the troops. I got the power and I'm going to use it. I really, that scares me because that's what authoritarianism is about.
What makes this moment notable isn't Bernie Sanders saying it, it's where he's saying it on the Theo Vaughn podcast, a space that doesn't fit neatly into left or right, but reaches millions who are skeptical of both. What this moment shows isn't a shift toward the left or the right. It's a demand for accountability. Voters aren't asking for purity tests or party loyalty. They're asking for policies that reflect how people actually live, work, and raise families. Where nearly half the country identifies as independent and majorities say enforcement has gone too far, the message to me is clear. The old political playbook is not matching public reality. I watched that interview and thought I was going to take away one thing of like him going off, and I took away a whole other thing, and I ended up changing my lens based on the fact that I don't watch Theo Vaughn often. I thought that because he supported Trump or seemed very amicable to him, that I just put him in the bro podcast lane. But he certainly surprised me in that interview. He asked real questions. He seemed empathetic to everything going on and seemed to echo some of the thoughts of, I think, the everyday American that's not in these fringes of either party. And looks at situations like, okay, yes, immigration reform was necessary. A lot of people polled, or if you ask people, might say that ICE might be going too far. There are people who believe they aren't, but I think a lot of the country agrees Renee Good shouldn't be dead right now. And so, there's just a lot that's going on, I think, right now that's making people question, well, are Democratic leaders the answer, or is no party serving me right now?
I mean, it's important, I think, to remember that Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan came from a kind of Bernie Sanders direction and orientation previously. They were economic populists and social moderates, and maybe socially and culturally not woke at all, so anti-liberal. and maybe more comfortable with the right in that way, but economically very in line with Bernie Sanders, and on foreign policy very in line with Bernie Sanders and anti-interventionists on the right and libertarians. So there's a cohesive ideology there that was not comfortable in either the Republican side or the Democratic side for a while. And I mean, frankly, it used to constitute a lot of a Rising's audience when this show first caught attention, when the hosts were Crystal and Sagar years ago, before me. Crystal was very passionately pro Bernie Sanders, and even a right-wing populist could appreciate some of the things that he was saying. And so, part of that, it was I noticed it from afar, this massive alternate media ecosystem and interest in this political figure. But what happened is, because of COVID and because of some other things, that became less, and also because of how Bernie Sanders was treated by the establishment of his own party, by Hillary Clinton.
He talks about that, yeah.
They didn't really have a home on the Democratic side anymore, and they've tried to figure out if they have a home in the Republican side, and it's not a neat fit, as many of the things Bernie Sanders is saying about ICE enforcement resonate with a Theo Von type. And I appreciate Bernie Sanders saying it, and I respect him, and I appreciate some of the things he says. My criticism of him would be he's calling out Donald Trump for wielding government power in these showy ways on ICE and some
Venezuela
policy. But Bernie Sanders, if he had power, would also wield government power in a very, I would argue, heavy-handed and powerful way to go after to raise taxes, to increase regulation, to confiscate more wealth from
Is that really
people.
apples to apples, though? I think if you put policies forth, that's different than putting boots on the ground in American cities. And we heard the president when all the military leaders were in one location, because Hegseth called them all there last year, and the president spoke to the crowd and was like, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but get practice in these American cities. And people condemn those statements like, what do you mean practice while you're in these cities fighting crime and immigration? That's not a place to practice. And what we're seeing out of Minnesota now is it looks like, what's going on here? We can't organize our leadership. And Mayor Frey was on Cuomo's show last night to respond to everybody that says, well, if you would have worked with the president, we wouldn't be here right now. And he said, I don't trust what's coming out of the administration to be true. They've proven that they overstepped. So you're just expecting a local leader he wasn't even told that J.D. Vance was coming to town to have this dialogue with him. He's like, how do you leave out the mayor of the city that you say is the most troublesome? They're not seriously trying to come up with a solution. So you have to admit that some of what Bernie Sanders is saying, how the president just makes decisions, skipping over whoever the most important decision makers usually are in that process, whether it's Congress with Venezuela or whether it's leadership in Minnesota.
Okay, but new incoming Democrat, Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, supposed to be a moderate Democrat. What's the first thing she's done since taking office? She repealed the popular orders by Glenn Youngkin, previous Republican governor, to have local law enforcement cooperate with ICE, not in mass deportation of absolutely everyone, but for illegal immigrants with an additional violent criminal offense. That's what the participation was. Here it was in Virginia. I think that's the same thing most people can get on board with. She's repealed that. There will be no cooperation with ICE at all. It'll be a sanctuary city type thing. That's the common sense Democratic moderate? That's what she's doing? That's what I'm saying. On the Democratic side, these policies are so far to the left and so far outside the norms of what the American people want. And I think the administration has gone too far as well. And I've been willing to call that out. I don't like a lot of what I'm seeing, and I think this is very unfortunate. But we had a sensible, moderate approach in Virginia under the previous governor, who was great, Glenn Youngkin. That's gone now.
Well, I'm going to look into what Spanberger actually did. I know sometimes it's overstated in the headlines, but I'd like to really understand exactly what all.
Look at it. This is from objective, mainstream sources, and I was like, wow, even they're saying it doesn't look good, but maybe we'll talk about it later.
Lindsey, what's in your lens?
Let's talk about it. So when a president threatens pollsters instead of grappling with what voters are actually saying, that's a problem. This week, the New York Times and Siena University released a poll showing that a majority of Americans disapprove of how President Trump is handling the economy, immigration, foreign policy, and affordability. 51% say his policies have made life less affordable. Nearly half of voters, that's 49%, believe the country is worse off than a year ago. Now, those numbers don't just disappear because the president doesn't like them. Instead of addressing the substance of the concerns, Trump took to Truth Social to attack the poll itself. The Times Siena poll, which is always tremendously negative to me, especially just before the election of 2024, where I won in a landslide, will be added to my lawsuit against the failing New York Times. That's a quote from the president. Our lawyers have demanded that they keep all records and about how they computed these fake results, not just the fact that it was heavily skewed towards Democrats. They will be fully held responsible for all of their radical left lies and wrongdoing. Another quote from the president on Truth Social. He followed that up with another post that read in part, quote, "Fake and fraudulent polling should be virtually a criminal offense." Polls are not crimes, Mr. President. Journalism is not sabotage. And threatening legal action every time the data is inconvenient does not change the data. The Times chief political analyst, Nate Cohen, summed this up plainly, writing that, quote, "Voters have an unfavorable view of Mr. Trump's performance on almost every issue tested in the poll." He noted that the numbers closely resemble polling ahead of Trump's 2020 loss. And the warning signs go beyond the economy. Immigration, a pillar of Trump's 2024 campaign, is now underwater. Just 40% approve of his immigration agenda, 58% disapprove. Among independents, 71% say ICE has gone too far with enforcement. That's not a messaging problem, that's a governing problem. Now, Trump argues Republicans are fixing an economy damaged by President Biden, but Americans don't live in talking points. They live in monthly bills. Inflation's up 2.7% year over year. The typical household is spending $184 more per month than last year and $590 more than 3 years ago, according to Moody's Analytics, not me. Grocery prices haven't meaningfully come down. Energy, medical care, coffee, and ground beef all cost more. This is not theoretical, it's everyday life. Trump already sued the New York Times for $15 billion. A federal judge dismissed it, calling the complaint legally empty. The New York Times says the revised lawsuit can be looked at as an intimidation tactic meant to silence independent reporting and generate PR attention. Well, good luck with that. Because suing pollsters and attacking the press won't lower grocery prices, won't stabilize energy costs, and won't make life more affordable. Governing will. And right now, voters are saying clearly they want less outrage and more results.
All right, so I actually agree with a lot of what you said. Primarily the idea that Trump is using his time and focus and energy to attack polls and media reports as opposed to actually fixing issues. And I think one of the problems that people have had in really the past 3 months of the administration is that they haven't seen the first 3 months where it was very action-oriented, it was very policy-driven. Now it seems that there's a lot of grievances being addressed by the president, and that doesn't translate well when people are still feeling the pain of a slowly recovering economy post-COVID. And so I do think that the president is really wasting time on trying to sue media outlets as opposed to doubling down on fixing the actual issues.
And the lawsuit to me is one part of it, but the bigger part is that a lot of people say, like, when people are critical of the president, that it's just like, blame it on mainstream media or an unfair criticism. But polling, whether it's New York Times poll or a variety of others, have showed that there's been like a steady decline of support for the president, most particularly around how the economy is being handled. And so that bleeds into everything else. Like, as you ask people how they feel about foreign affairs or immigration, I'm sure there's a connection to the fact that they can maybe agree with some of the policies. Like I said, it's great that he's on this phase 2 of Israel and Gaza and trying to figure out how to quell that situation. But people at home were like, wait, you were the businessman in chief, and just looking day to day, the only thing that's down is pretty much gas, which again, I will point that out that is down from a year ago. But it's still like, where is the person that was supposed to be handling the issues that Biden was failing so miserably at? And then when you get into the actual issues that he's handling, even though he does have a large swath of Republican support with immigration, I think the public view is starting to sway with the major incidents in Minnesota. And you're seeing new polling that's showing that people and we heard Joe Rogan and other podcasters speak about this, but are moving towards a place where they're like, well, maybe this is too far, or maybe some of the policies are too far. And so I'm just trying to figure out where he has like a core policies that his whole entire base is supporting, because it looks like the country, even the independents that got him in office, or the people that maybe didn't like his antics but like some of his policies, are now like, well, I don't even like the policies anymore.
Yeah, I think the immigration question is complicated because in polls where they ask about do they think the Trump administration has gone too far, most people agree. But then there was a Plymouth Union poll that came out that found that people do disagree with the anti-ICE protests as well, right? They say that ICE should be able to do their jobs unimpeded, that they broadly support Trump's idea of doing mass deportation and getting illegals removed from the country. And so we see a lot of disparate numbers depending on how the question's asked. And so I do think on the immigration question specifically that we don't have a full clear picture yet, but I agree that the economy is more obvious in that consistently across a number of polls, no matter what the question is, if it's economic related, people are dissatisfied.
And I think when we saw the president in Davos give a speech basically touting how much we've progressed economically specifically, and then how people feel, I think it's a fair criticism to say that it's similar to the tactic that was happening during the Biden administration, is that, oh, these polls say we're doing better, we are doing better, but people feel differently, and you're trying to convince them they don't feel what they feel.
We just have to explain Bidenomics to them, and then they'll get it. And there was that big gaffe by Brooke Rollins, the ag secretary, who was talking about the $3 struggle meals.
Oh my gosh, that's still going viral.
I know. It's like, even if you could, I mean, she doubled down on it because she went out and she said, well, look, if you buy this, this, and this, then you can do, 3 meals a day for $3 a piece, and it's totally fine. But the answer there is not to do the math and try to convince people. You should have never gone out in the first place and insinuated that the problem is that people are just not basically being judicious or frugal enough with their shopping habits. That never goes over well from a political messaging standpoint when you're dealing with economic issues. And so to me, it just seemed very tone deaf.
I think they need to have some more communication, like what's the messaging? Because even with Biden, there were small wins that I think his team could have pointed to show how progress is being made. But just telling people you shouldn't feel how you feel, I think, is a ridiculous stance to take. And that lands really well with people who are like, okay, groceries are really expensive, but you're telling me I should eat crackers, you know what I mean? And be full. Or like, figure out how to make this turkey last all week. It's like, people are really struggling. They're not making up these costs. I mean, there's a back and forth about products costing more because of some of the tariffs, possibly is Costco in the middle of suing the administration. So there's a lot of reasons why people feel economically even tighter than they did a year ago. And I think the president has to address it.
Yeah, and he needs to do more creative things like the ending institutional investors owning single family homes. That type of creativity and bipartisan solution, I think, is what people want to see.